Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the New Muslim Workshop. My name is Mahmoud. Today we will be discussing the different definitions of the umbrella term zina. What is zina and what are the different categories associated with the term zina? Viewer discretion is advised. This is an adult subject matter, so if you're watching this with your children, I suggest you stop, get them out of the room, and then watch this alone. When they're old enough, inshallah, they can watch this and hopefully benefit from it. Stick around.
Welcome to the New Muslim Workshop.
Welcome back. The term zina in Arabic means illicit sexual act, meaning that it is a forbidden sexual act, that it should not have happened in the first place, and you are not allowed to do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran states, "And come not near unlawful sexual intercourse," aka zina. Verily, it is a fahishah, anything that transgresses its limits, a great sin, and an evil way that leads one to hell unless Allah forgives him. This is Surah al-Isra 1732 of the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do not come near zina. Do not approach it. Now the problem is that zina is effectively the end result. Zina as we understand it, as in fornication, whether it be fornication between two unmarried people, or adultery, which is fornication of two married people, or a non-married person with a married person. So that is the end result. Prior to that, there is the gateway definitions, or the gateway aspects of zina. Gateway meaning that these will eventually lead to the destructive aspect of it, which is the actual act of illegal sexual intercourse. So when we talk about zina, we first need to go back and look at the definition that the Prophet ﷺ talked about when he spoke about the senses, when he spoke about the zina of the senses. And the hadith, and this is mentioned in our previous video about the subject matter, which is called A Sense of Modesty. I will link it here. Go watch that. It'll give you a basic idea of what we mean about modesty in Islam. Modesty as a shield that guards you and your loved ones from this act of zina, from this act of illicit sexual activity. So the hadith of the Prophet is narrated in this case by Abu Hurayrah, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah has decreed for every son of Adam his share of zina, and there is no way to escape from it. The zina of the eye is a glance. The zina of the tongue is speaking, and the zina of the mind is wishing and hoping. Then the private parts either acts upon this or does not. Reported by al-Bukhari 1126 and Muslim 42046. So this hadith is the center point of our previous video. I would highly suggest you go and watch it. But it is also the introduction of this video. And when we talk about zina of the senses as a gateway to zina of the illicit form, the genitals, we talk about the first stage of zina, which is a person looking at something and wanting it, looking at a lady passing by and observing her and having this look equate to or eventually lead to this yearning for this woman that he saw because of a glance. Instead of performing the act of lowering the gaze, when you kind of look at something and then you turn away, this is an important act in Islam, and this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered the Muslim man and woman to do in our daily life. So if we see something that we like and it is illicit, it is not something that is halal for us, or if it is halal, but you have to take a few steps towards gaining this in the halal way. Meaning, if I am not married and I see a girl that is not married and I want her, then I should obviously go and ask for her hand in marriage instead of trying to go around her family and trying to entice her and tempt her and seduce her and eventually end up in this sort of the pit of adultery. Or fornication in this case, because we wouldn't be married. So this is the first stage of zina, which is the zina of the senses. The zina of the senses is punishable by Allah. It is not punishable by anything. There's no had for it, because like if I looked at somebody, who's going to know? There's no CCTV that is everywhere that's looking at me and then just sort of writing down that Mahmoud has looked at so-and-so. It's kind of like fasting. Nobody would know that you're fasting unless you told them that you were fasting. And it's the same if I'm sitting down listening and I am enticing myself or tempting myself with listening to a person's voice by calling them and talking to them in an inappropriate and immodest way, or me listening to music and kind of ramping myself up, like pumping, for no pun intended, but pumping myself up to go and do something that is haram, either going to a club and talking to girls so that I can pick them up, so that the end result would be fornication. So the level 1 of zina is zina of the senses. And the zina of the senses does not have a had, does not have a punishment, because no intercourse has happened. Intercourse is kind of the demarcation line between that which does not have a punishment and that which has severe punishment. So when we talk about the different categories of zina, number 1, we have zina of the senses. This is not punishable by anything beyond possibly smacking somebody upside the head. If I'm walking around, I'm somebody who's observing a teenager doing this, my son, my cousin, my nephew, our neighbor, whatever, and I see him doing something that he shouldn't be doing, obviously the first thing I should do is advise him. If it's a little kid, I'd be like, what you doing? What are you doing? Look down, man. Stop being a creeper, stop being a stalker, stop. You like her? If you like her, go ask for her hand in marriage. You shouldn't be looking. You're still several years away from marriage. Taqillah, fear Allah. So in a situation like this, there is no had. There is no punishment that befalls that person. The punishment starts when intercourse happens. So if, la samah Allah, Allah forbid, you've gone from the stage of the zina of the senses to the next stage, which is actually committing the act of fornication. There are several categories within the act of fornication that one is worse than the next. The bad one, but it's effectively entry level, is the zina or fornication of 2 unmarried people who are not maharim that are forbidden upon each other. That relationship would not be incestuous. That person is a foreign person. They're not from your family. So, God forbid, you sleep with a girl that's not from your family, that's not related to you, you're not married, she's not married, and you get caught. And there are 4 witnesses to the act, and so you are brought in front of the magistrate. The had for this, the punishment for this is 100 lashes and banishment for a year. 100 lashes, whipping, so you are whipped 100 times, and you are banished for a year. The stage after that, and this is one of the biggies, is the adultery of a married person with another married person. And this in Islam is on par with murder. And I'll explain why. So in Islam, if you are 2 married people and you are caught performing adultery, the punishment for this is stoning to death. It's execution. For this to occur, for the execution to occur, 4 people have to come forth and say that we have witnessed this, and each will have to swear. Or if you are someone who wishes to absolve yourself, you want to expiate the sin from yourself so that you meet Allah not having the sin on top of your head, then you would go to the magistrate and you would confess 4 times and you would not retract your confession. If this happens, then you are stoned to death. There are very few accounts of people actually going and bearing witness upon themselves or having 4 people come out and bear witness against them for them to basically have the punishment of execution performed on them. The reason why it's bad is for several reasons. The first is that when you are married, you have a closed sexual circle. The closed sexual circle is between you and your wife. So there's nothing that can possibly come in between them. It's just you and your wife. If you go and sleep with somebody else, then effectively you've added that person to your no longer closed sexual circle. But not only that, you've added whoever else she slept with to that sexual circle. So if any of these people have STDs or have any kind of fatal STDs, such as AIDS or syphilis or anything like that, then you have effectively infected your wife with this disease and effectively caused her to be placed in danger, and that is as good as murder. Now, notwithstanding that, that's one explanation. In addition to that, there is the dishonor that comes to the spouse. There is also the idea that that person might not be aware that this person is their son or daughter. They don't know if this child is theirs or not, so they're raising somebody else's child. There could be a problem later on if, for instance, the woman has slept with the neighbor, for example, and she has born children from the neighbor, and this child grows up thinking that the person who is their father, who is basically in the house, is their actual biological father, and possibly might, decide they want to marry the neighbor's daughter. So that's effectively incest. And obviously this will cause the breaking of the home, and this will cause a societal problem. So that is why the punishment for adultery is so severe in this context, is because the lineages in Islam, the familial lineage, is extremely important, and the idea of trust between the spouses is extremely important, as well as the idea of protecting people from possible diseases that could cause their death. Because in a relationship, the closest bond that you can have is to your wife. And if you're putting your wife's life in danger, or if your wife is putting your life in danger by going and doing this and this betrayal, this is the deepest and most severe cut that anybody can have to their trust. The one after that, there are categories that are worse than that. And the category that is worse than that is the idea of sleeping with a mahram, with someone who is forbidden for you to marry. So the people that are forbidden for you to marry as a woman would be your father, your brother, would be your father-in-law, would be your uncle, would be your grandfather. So let's say you have a relationship with your grandfather or your father. These are even more egregious as acts, as zina, as sins, than just adultery. So adultery is bad. What's even worse than that? Well, zina or adultery with a mahram, with basically an incestuous sexual relation. So that is pretty bad. What comes after that? What could possibly be worse than this incestuous relationship? Well, there is having sexual relations with the same sex. So homosexual relationships are considered even worse than incestuous relationships. Not that they're in any way good, but they're all bad. So what's worse than this is the idea of sexual zina, where a man might be married and he goes and he has sexual relationships with a man. Even if he's not married and he goes and has sexual relations with a man, this is egregious and terrible, and he shouldn't be doing that. What's even worse than that? What can possibly be worse than homosexuality in this context? The next step onwards would be having sexual intercourse with an animal. Doesn't matter what gender of animal. This is haram. So all of these are considered one worse than the other. You have, at the top of it, you have the two people that are unmarried that have sexual relations, and their punishment is the whipping, the 100 lashes. The next one up is adultery, where a married person has sexual relations with another married person, and the punishment for that is stoning. It is important to know that once the punishment has been performed upon you, you will meet Allah without that specific sin hanging on top of you. You've expiated it. It's done. In this context, it's done. The next one up is obviously what's worse than that is an incestuous relationship. What's worse than that? Homosexual relationship. What's worse than that is bestiality, basically the sexual intercourse with an animal. So within the definition of zina, there are subcategories. And one of the subcategories of zina is the zina of a person who used to be married and is no longer married. So a person who was married and then no longer is married, and then he commits adultery. in that case, it is adultery. It's not fornication. So even though he is divorced, the fact that he was married at one point in time and understands how egregious this is as an act, then the punishment for that person is stoning. So when we look at punishments, the different definitions of zina are not the same. When the Prophet ﷺ talks about the zina of the eye, he's talking about a gateway that could lead to zina. And since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us that we should avoid zina as much as possible, we should also avoid the gateways to zina, like touching somebody who is not a mahram, like listening to somebody having discussions and mixing with the different genders and talking to, looking at, having conversations and listening to them. All of these are considered gateways to actual fornication, which is defined by the act of intercourse, of genital intercourse. Now, one of the exceptions with regards to the punishment of zina is rape. If a situation arises where a man has raped a woman, the woman was forced into the sexual intercourse, the punishment for the man, if he is caught, is stoning, and there is no punishment for the woman because she was raped, because it was not in her control. She is not liable for anything. She didn't do anything. It's all because of something that happened to her. This is a basic overview of the meaning of the different categories of zina. It's important for you to understand that when the Prophet ﷺ talks about the zina of the eye, this is not punishable by stoning. When we talk about somebody going and, for example, a woman who is muhajjaba, wearing loud colors to attract attention, this is not punishable by stoning. The worst that she will get is a stern talking to by her parents, effectively, or somebody from the community. So I hope this was informative. When we talk about zina, it is important for you to understand the different categories of zina and what the different punishments are. And unfortunately, we do not have a Sharia court in this day and age that I am aware of that implements this. So maybe in Saudi Arabia and maybe in Kuwait or maybe in some of the Middle Eastern countries, you will find a Sharia court that will implement these. But as of now, in this day and age, we do not have a court that will implement this. I hope this was informative. Jazakumullah khair. Thanks for watching. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.